So welcome to our last lecture about EUREKA. We have discussed EUREKA as a mysterious force which is within human nature. We have not solved the problem. What is it? We cannot place it physiologically, anatomically into our brain, into our body. We only know indirectly that it must be. In terms of this unknown, we have tried to explain a great part of history of mankind. Our course was based on few assumptions. Here I go against great man, Isaac Newton, who never supposed to have assumptions. The whole great tradition of mathematics for 3,000 years, 2,900 years, never believed in assumptions. They believed in axioms, clear, true, self-evident truth. This is a great part of the tradition. I go against it, against Isaac Newton, who only 300 years ago produced a great modern physical theory, which he introduced by saying, this is not a hypothesis. I do not pretend to give you a hypothesis. This is the real stuff of the universe. So he was mistaken. Another man I am challenging is St. John, who said that at the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. I think at the beginning was the idea, which produced some kind of proxy representation of the idea. And out of these ideas, in context, came EUREKA, which was not in words. EUREKAs never occur in words. It is kind of drive, hint. You have to translate into verbal proxies. So our course was based on assumption, mainly from the great Greek ancient tradition, dating back to 6 to 4 centuries BC, to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So this is the second great tradition which had. And the second great tradition is that tradition which is the prevalent assumption of Western culture. Man, know thyself. This is what Greeks had inscribed in Delphi. Man, know thyself. After that, you can start talking about people and the world. Know thyself. After that, we talk about the cosmos in our search and attempt to decipher the essence of the world around us. And finally, other questions closely connected: how to live, and what is the purpose of life, of each of us within the society we are part of. So Greeks were down to the earth, and they tried to explain man in the world surrounding them and the cosmos above them. In order to do it, they had to challenge their own tradition, which was theological tradition. Before that time, everything moved in Greek society in close connection with gods. They were so human They were true replica of human beings. One day, there was a man who realized it. He announced it and conceived everything around this new EUREKA. This is the tradition from which we have started. This is what I maintain in this course. I gave you the outline of looking to the past. And if you have it in front of you, you see that there are 7 great traditions. Rome, Greece, Israel, Egypt, China, India, Persia. We roughly can see here 2 basic traditions which we call the West and the East. Within our Western tradition, we were so absorbed that we never, for millennia, recognized that there could be something else. We have regarded ourselves as the belly button of the universe. And much, much later, we have discovered that there is some Eastern tradition. The great British writers, Kipling, gave us the question, can East and West ever meet? British moved into India. They have encountered new, completely different traditions. Through India, they were able to recognize that there are other cultures, other people living with other system of values. So, due to British, we were able to have a new acquaintance with what Rudy Kipling so beautifully said, can East and West ever meet? This was the problem of roughly the last 200 years. I think we have solved this problem that they do meet, they did meet, and we live in a world where East and West is very closely entwined. It was after Second World War and aftermath that Japan, and especially China, during Cold War, including all other countries, accepted certain Western values. And these values penetrated their own traditions. There is a very interesting story of this Europeanization or Westernization. From history you probably know that Russia was, the tradition of Russia was different one from the Western. In spite of being Christian, they accepted Christianity from Constantinople. And due to their enslavement by Mongols, they were totally different nation than any nation in the West. During the time of Peter the Great, there was a group of intellectuals who tried to bring ideas from the West into Russia. They felt that Russia was backward. As soon as they started moving these ideas from Western Europe, there was a strong movement within Russia based on traditional Orthodox religion, trying to fight everything what was coming from the West. There was a kind of slogan, the Western world is a dying corpse which stinks. We don't want to have anything from this decadent culture. We have our Tsar, we have our Orthodox religion, we have our Russian racial core ruling this empire. They call themselves Slavophiles. And those few who try to bring Western ideas were called Westerners. For next 300 years since Peter the Great, these two camps clashed. Peter the Great, as I mentioned before, went so far after he recognized how backward Russia was. He went incognito to Holland with his small trusted friends. In Amsterdam he learned how to build ships, boats. Incognito Russian Tsar moves freely in Holland and tries to learn how Western society lived. He was a big man. Peter the Great was, in my estimate, about 6'6", 6'7", a good material for NBA. Probably one of the tallest men on the continent. In spite of Holland, when Dutch people are pretty tall. He was not recognized until later. So far he went to learn Western know-how. When he was abroad, an insurrection was organized against him. They wanted to depose him. As soon as he learned it, off he went back to Moscow on a horse. There was no airline, no car. You can imagine from Amsterdam on a horse. He came in time and he did not forget to bring with himself a good pair of Western scissors. You say, why scissors? He came back with scissors, defeated the rebellion, and introduced the Westernization with his scissors, going to the priests and cutting their long beards. He was quite radical. You can imagine the reaction. A priest, you know, without beard. They have usually a long beard like this. So they appeared like a joke, bad joke. He prevailed, and what followed was internal fight of Slavophiles and Westerners for the future of Russia. The best people in Russia sided with Westerners. Poets, scientists, teachers, they were Westerners. All through these 3 centuries, you have the internal fight where the most outstanding people of Russia sided with Westerners and later with Slavophiles after disillusion with the West. One of the greatest writers, Dostoevsky. In young years, he was a Westerner. He was sentenced to death because of his membership to revolutionary group Petrashevцы. All his comrades were shot to death. When Dostoevsky came for the execution, he decided to to dedicate his last few minutes to recollecting himself, what he was doing, what he did not do, thanking God for giving him life, and saying goodbye and expecting the bullet. Instead of the bullet, Tsar's envoy came with a letter telling him that he was pardoned. Instead of being shot to death, he will go to Siberia. He went to Siberia, where he was imprisoned with the greatest criminals of Russia. It was here where he learned, by listening to them, about human psyche, telling about their crimes. And he knew instinctively what might have been true. This was his penetration into human nature. After about 6 years, he was pardoned and he was able to return to St. Petersburg, where he continued writing his greatest novels, Crime and Punishment, Brothers Karamazov. When I studied in Austria, I had a professor who was of Russian origin of Germany, professor of philosophy and psychology. And when he was retiring, it was a custom in Europe that each retiring professor received last semester for his last shot, in which he was expected to summarize his life's finding. Professor Erisman was a world-known psychologist, and I participated in his experiments. One of the great experiments described in Scientific American was based on an assumption. Man can get used to anything. Man can overcome his deepest habits. He conceived goggles which turn the world upside down. And in his experiment with these goggles, you learn to walk in the world upside down and you get used to it. But you cannot remove the goggles. He went so far that he was riding his motorcycle with goggles. It was a famous experiment to prove that men indeed can get used to anything. I did not survive long, because I was driving my bicycle and I had a girlfriend and she did not like it. And my friends did not like it. They could not understand this foolish experiment, that you walk like a fool, What do you want to prove? It was difficult to explain it to common. So I dropped out.
But haven't they found that we do that naturally because the way the eye works, things are upside down anyway?
Yes,
yes. And the brain.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Then it was, after you got used to it, after you removed the goggles, this was another problem, how to get used to the old world. But the experiment proof was here. Man indeed can get used to anything.
But not you. But not you.
No. I was an odd bird, who could not take it. I dropped out, but I became a very good friend of Professor Erisman until his last days. And when he was giving this last lecture, all psychologists were coming to take his lecture, believing that he will summarize the findings of psychology. When he announced the title of the course, the title was Dostoevsky. And he started, I have to tell you, before he started, students in Europe have an index. This index lists the lecture and initial signature of the professor. At the end of the semester, you get the second signature that you have fulfilled everything in the course, theoretically. So there were so many people that the classroom, which was for about 150 students, was packed with about 450 students, packed in the windows, sitting. And it was the last lecture of Professor Harrisman. And I was helping him to sign the index. He was supposed to sign it to each student. And he was old, so I was signing Big E Harrisman for him. And as soon as he announced his next lecture had only about 200 students. Third lecture, 50 students. And he introduced it. What this man, Dostoevsky, did not know about human nature is not worth knowing. And then he went through the work of Dostoevsky, showing how psychiatrists, psychologists were stealing from his insights, let's say about epilepsy, about practically all insights he had, they turned into findings of psychologists. At the end of the semester, don't be surprised, there were again 450 students, the last lecture.
To get those signatures.
They needed a signature. Professor Harrisman was standing next to me with tears in his eyes and said, "That's human nature." He could not sign one single index for the students. So I was Big E Harrisman to every student. Then we walked together home. 2 weeks before that, his wife died. He was completely crushed. He told me, that's human nature. So, this fight between East and West continued and moved to Orient. There were, in 19th century, similar forces in Japan, which were getting stronger and stronger against samurai culture, traditional culture of Japan. There was similar fight in China due to British and their influence in India. In Russia, in the meantime, socialist movement was getting stronger and stronger. With final victory of the West, of the Western ideas in Russia, by victory of Lenin's communism, based on ideas of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Something similar happened in China. Young Mao went to study to France. The young generation of Orient studied in London, in Paris, in Heidelberg, in Western University. So it is rather remarkable victory of the West. So the West has won in Russia, West has won in China, in Japan, in India. Kipling's question was answered. East and West met. This is the world we live in now. In all fields of human activities, ideas, education, science, technology, how to, were being disseminated in the rest of the world. Elites of their nation, of the Orient, studied into West and brought back home Western ideas. This is second half of 19th century and 20th century. What was this so intoxicating for the rest of the world? In my estimate, it was that what came out of ancient Greek tradition. Concept of man, concept of the cosmos. Search for deciphering the puzzles of the concept of the world. How to live in a society. How to, Roman engineering. These were penetrating ideas which changed the world. It is very interesting that the first great tradition, the tradition coming from our religious source, which moves through the whole Western tradition, exemplified by triumph of Christianity, triumph of Muslim religion, the concept of religion, religio, is Latin word meaning relationship, religio, relationship with God, an elaboration on relationship with God. This is the source which is mostly Semitic source, which played a very important role and still is playing in our Western culture. So during this Westernization of the world, don't be surprised that this very source will go hand in hand and will try to convert the rest of the world for the values of Western Christianity. This is our missionary movement. Completely aside, from this Greek tradition, this is missionary movement which flooded Africa and Asia. Courageous people moved into the world to save the world. Second half of 19th century, 20th century. I never forget when I came to Innsbruck to study at the University of Innsbruck, and I wanted to study it in Vienna, but Vienna was in central Vienna, was in Russian hands. And so I moved as far away after 5 years of hiding in Czechoslovakia, escaping from communists as far as I could. So I moved to Innsbruck in 1954, 9 years after the end of the war. And I never forget, 1955, I have met young people, neatly dressed, with ties, white shirt, moving through streets of Innsbruck and giving people free books, Mormon Bible. At that time, they tried to get land to erect a church. Among the peasants who were Catholic, Roman Catholic, it was a country 90% Roman Catholics, 10% Protestants. There was one peasant who sold for high price 1 acre. Mormons erected a beautiful structure, a temple. And there were many, many young people coming, neatly dressed and moving around, trying to convert Austrians, Tyroleans. Tyroleans are known to be hard-headed people. So it is not easy to penetrate their skulls, you know. And they did not like the peasant who sold 1 acre to Mormons. They didn't know who Mormons were, but they instinctively rejected anything like that. Later on, when I studied at the university, I was participating in seminars in EUREKA House. This was another movement after victory of the United States in the Second World War. There were EUREKA houses erected all around the world. They had beautiful libraries. And young people were coming together from all over the world. And here is where I met this neatly dressed young man having coffee and Coca-Cola. And I believe that they were studying at the University of Innsbruck. So I asked them, what do you study? No, they said, no, we don't study. We don't study. We are here, you know, to disseminate our belief. We are going to save these people to give them true belief. And I found out these were Mormons. They were trying to save Europe. Churches were established, temples were established all over Western Europe. 20 years later, there is one of these young, neatly dressed men coming to France to stay for 2 years. By coincidence, it is our today's presidential candidate. He spent 2 years in France. I would have asked him the same question at that time as I asked my American students who were trying to save Europe. They did not pay attention to anything else, to general culture, to literature, to philosophy of the environment. They had only one mission: to save the people of Europe. So this is the second movement, you know, to westernize not only the Orient, but also our own Western world. I very doubt, you know, that they were successful. But it was a great attempt. In the meantime, the Greek source, you know, with culture of man, penetrated the rest of the world. This is what we have nowadays in the Orient. And we have succeeded so far that we live in a world which is united by United Nations economically through mutual dependency, financially by our willingness to live it up in borrowing from our sugar daddy. We live in total dependency on our sugar daddy, deeper and deeper. You see how closely connected this world is? This is a proof. Linguistically, we are living in a world where English replaces lingua franca. The whole world speaks English. Philosophically, subscribing to a concept of homo consumptor, man as consumer being. This is our today's leading philosophy. Consume, more you are. The famous philosophical statements, cogito ergo sum, I think I am, is replaced by I consume I am. And more I consume, more I am. And if I cannot make what I consume, I borrow. Almost $16 trillion from our sugar daddy. And we count on him. Because if he stops paying, what are we going to do? That's the question. Ancient Greeks said, hic Rhodus, hic salta. Here is Rhodus, and show what you can do. So this is the question. Can we tighten up our belts? Probably not. It hurts. Out of the 7 various traditions, and each of them started with series of eurekas. And they produced something very individualistic for the respective culture. Culture of Rome, Greece, Israel, Egypt, India, China, Persia. Each of them was unique, produced culture and civilization which was unique. Nowadays, we have a global culture, or probably not as much culture, but more civilization. And this civilization has corresponding set of values, horizon, aspirations, economical order, financial order. So again, this is the world we live in. The variety of the past does not exist anymore. East and West met. And this is the world we have now. We have emphasized Eureka as the source. Eureka was this mysterious source in all of them. we have narrowed down, to these three: Semitic, Greek, and Roman. I have said many times, each Western nation has these three, and you can scrape the surface, you discover how they became united. But these three became tremendous force. Nowadays the prevalent force is the ancient Greek ones, translated into economical form. Science, technology, and corresponding economy are the final result which move this world. It is not world religion. You see, nothing like this happened as far as intermingling of these various religious traditions. We cannot speak of world religion. The culture and civilization we have is a very unique. And again, it can be traced to search, to discovery, the world we live in, using our human abilities and verifying what we guess could be the case. This is a necessity, theoretical necessity, You cannot just throw out your ideas. You have to expect that somebody will take them seriously and somebody will try to verify them. So this is probably the lasting force. This very force gave us a new view about the nature of the universe, how everything might have come into our present form. It was a long story from belief that we are the belly button of the universe into infinite universe, in which we are little droplet. From all significance, all value, to almost no value. But in spite of that, we are trying, to discover the meaning of the universe, meaning of the man in it, life, meaning of why one should live decent life, why one should be ethical. So, in spite of being lost in this infinite universe, we still insist to discover the purpose of the cosmos, purpose of each individual in it. This is the lasting striving we have, and we probably will never stop. And especially in a class like this, and I told you it is enjoyable to have people who can think, who can look back at their life, and who don't do it for a grade, who can do it out of necessity because they are human. So this is something which can be discussed only in class like this. It would be very difficult to discuss at university level or in our high school, not mentioning elementary school. There is just no grasp, of the significance of these questions. So how far we can go, we can only hope. We can hope that we will establish some better system of human relationship in this infinite world. But this concept of infinite world is the discovery of last 400 years. It can never be taken back. This world started, we assume, 18 billion years ago. The other tradition, religious tradition, believes, and I said 47% of our compatriots believe it started 4,000 years ago. How can you argue with it? This has implications in everyday living. What is it which closes human mind? It is faith, blind faith, which has been also traditionally regarded as the most important aspect of human life, without which human life is not worth living. Now we are challenging it, that there can be something in terms of values better than blind faith. And this is very dangerous. It is not only in our country, but in the rest of that world which has been westernized, Europeanized. Look at the Muslim world. You would be afraid to move through there, to express your view. As a woman, you would have very little chance to live decent life. But if you don't know about decent life, you can accept anything. So this is 21st century. No difference between the time of 8th century AD, when followers of Muhammad were fighting among themselves and established hatred of each other. This persists until this very day. But the same was among our Western Christian groups, Western Catholicism, Orthodoxy. Each of them created a power structure. This power structure controlled millions and millions of people. So religion, politics, finance, everyday decision how men should live became a power structure. It took a long time in the West before this power structure was reduced and then destroyed. It was a long fight. After Dark Ages, as we call them, and you can understand that they who lived in Dark Ages did not call themselves, I live in Dark Ages, It's coming from outside. When you look at it, these were Dark Ages. But the Western culture and civilization slowly but surely was able to get out of it. Many courageous people had to die. It was difficult to fight this monolithic Western order represented by Roman Catholic Church and by Vatican. Vatican survived. We still have Vatican, but nothing in comparison what it used to be. They still rule, I don't know, probably half a billion people of the world. But they cannot control them the way they used to. The same was the case with Orthodox religion. Orthodox religion was decimated by victory of Turks in Constantinople. Constantinople, the third Rome, second Rome, was occupied by Turks. So it was victorious war of one creed over another creed. And from that center, people who escaped Constantinople laid down the foundation for Western Renaissance. Renaissance, rebirth. Rebirth of what? Of that what preceded Dark Ages. What preceded the Age of Faith. They moved from Constantinople, scientists, philosophers, men of letters, musicians. They moved via Venice to Florence. What did they found it in Florence? Plato's Academy. Don't be surprised they did not establish NRA. It was Plato's Academy. And through Plato's Academy, they started radiating the ideas of antiquity. And started disseminating ideas from Plato's Academy in all the countries of Western Europe. What were the basic ideas? Concept of man. What you notice among painters, they dare to paint human being as human being. What started was a kind of new universal striptease. Man was shown in paintings what man is. Leonardo, this is man, anatomy of man. Woman, painted, as a woman is. Beautiful creatures of nature. Children. It was a slow process of taking off the clothes. This was regarded as blasphemous by the church. Church tried to eliminate it, defeat it, but it was such a strong force, this Renaissance force, that nobody was able to stop it. Leading people of the church, young people, secretly were Platonists, followers of New Plato Academy. They read Plato, Plato's dialogues, Aristotle. Ancient writings was revived, translated, At the same time, ancient Latin was changed into Italian, which was a dialect of Florence. It became foundation of modern Italian. Out of the dialect, let's say, famous work of Dante, Vita Nuova. His Latin was Vita Nova. So in this Florentine dialect, it was Nuova. It was really very language of people. Dante has raised dialect into dialect of people who will speak this language, not classical Latin. So this was linguistic revolution. And he wrote in this dialect his work. Other people followed. So there is a great linguistic revolution coming out of Renaissance. But there will be each field of human activities which will start changing. Man's relationship with the cosmos. Our Judeo-Christian tradition centers everything around the man in his relationship with God. This post-Renaissance view, the center is man. What is the world we live in? According to Bible, God created the world in 6 days and rested seventh day. And God created the world for us. We are on this God-given world, enjoying everything. Then in order to make it more exciting at night, he threw few stars around, so that we can get around when we are at the sea. You see, it is very pragmatic God, you know. And at the beginning, our faith is that we are living on a plate. And who would try to argue with it? Wherever you go, you walk on a plate. You never walked far enough, but wherever you are, there is a plate in front of you. How was it possible to see roundness? Can you ever see that something is round? You cannot. So God indeed created this beautiful world. And whoever will come and argue with it has to be destroyed. It's heretical. There is a corresponding scientific view accompanying this belief, and this was so-called Ptolemaic geocentric view, according to which we are the center of the universe and everything is around us. There were serious doubts about it all through the history. People had EUREKAs, but they did not dare, to go against this collective faith. One of the most notable men was member of the church, high-ranking officer of the church, Copernicus, 16th century AD. He suggested Sun to be center of our solar system, within which the Earth is one of the minor planets. He did not dare to announce it to the world of 16th century. Only in the last few days before he died, he gave his theory. It must have been Eureka, great Eureka, but he was afraid to disseminate his Eureka. Shortly before he died, he offered it to the world. It was published, and young people all over Europe got excited. They didn't know that many of them have to die when they embrace this anti-church theory. Many great men, many former members of the church had to die. I mentioned Giordano Bruno. In 1600 was burned at the stake. His follower, Galileo Galilei, was in front of the council, expected to defend his theory, heliocentric theory, sun-centered universe. It was very human that he was afraid of high temperatures. In the very last moment, to change the mind of the cardinals, he recalled all his theories. Said, I was mistaken. As soon as he pronounced it, he felt ashamed as man with scientific mind. And he said, e per si muove, and it's move, we move around in spite of that. They locked him up and kept him in house arrest until he died. So these were courageous people who fought for their eurekas. But eurekas which were not matter of blind faith. Eurekas which were not fully verified. They did not have the instruments with help of which they could have verified it fully, unquestionably. But they had enough evidence to convince those who were using their minds to consider the relationship of other stars, of other planets in our system. So at the beginning of 17th century, it was very difficult, to accept the belief that we are rather small part of solar system. The Earth is a very small, one of the smallest one. You see the implications. What does it mean for the religious tradition? There are other planets which are bigger than we are. Sun is the biggest one. What does it imply about the Bible, about Quran? Both cannot be the case. It can be either or. It cannot be both. And in next centuries there will be more and more of evidence collected that Copernicus was right. Again, what are the implications for our general belief, religious belief? Are there some implications for 47% of Americans nowadays? What is the case? Where shall we go? We are proud of having freedom of religion, freedom of believing anything. You see on television nowadays one of the great men of a sitcom. All of you were watching. What was the name? The sitcom. Famous sitcom. There is a little actor from the sitcom. It was Seinfeld. You have seen Seinfeld. Seinfeld during 80s, 90s, for 20 years, Seinfeld. There was a little man, Jewish fellow, funny fellow, and now he's used on television programs. You must have seen him, he says. Yeah, he has a small segment in our political news. You have seen him. He says, there are no lies, there are only beliefs. And he disappears. And then, a few hours later, you see him again. And this is in the middle of our today's political discussion. They show him, say, there are no lies, there are only beliefs. And disappears. So this is the world we live in. It probably, for a long time, won't be different unless man decides to start changing from within. Man, know thyself. Try to penetrate into yourself. Trust yourself. And you discover something you never were able to discover before. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. Know thyself. The beginning of Greek ancient tradition is still in front of us. And maybe we will be able to produce a better man, better human being, living more satisfactory life, being liberated from all kinds of superstitions. Amen.